Hello and welcome along to the Crystal Conversation. This is today an opportunity to meet with Nicholas Pearson, known as the Luminous Pearl. Nicholas is the author of 5 books. Nicholas? 5 books?
6 now.
Aha! I think I saw that last week. Bring on the 6th. The 5 books to date, with maybe we'll hear the title of the 6th, are The Stones of the Goddess, Crystal Healing for the Heart, Crystals for Karmic Healing, The 7 Archetypal Stones, Foundation of Reiki Ryotio, and the one that we're going to be discussing today, which is a further exploration into crystal basics, which, to be perfectly frank, is anything but. And I should really, I'm so delighted to welcome Nicholas along today. So, hi, Nicholas.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed listening and watching to the podcast, so it's a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you today.
Oh, Nicholas, your beauty abounds. It's lovely. The Nicholas's work allows us as the reader to establish the potential for a reframing of awarenesses of crystals, in that right from the first kickoff, he describes the crystals as being both something in the mineral kingdom, something that is both external and internally influential upon our beingness. And we, in turn, therefore, have the potential to be a little bit of an interface. And so for me, reading his material and appreciating that first initial statement, I'd like to open up there and ask, can you expand on that interconnectivity that we sit inside of with the mineral kingdom?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's nowhere we can go and not be interacting with something crystalline. You know, here I am sitting in my office. Of course, there are rocks all around me, but even above and beyond that, the things around me that are derived from the mineral kingdom are many. I mean, pigments in the paints on my walls, the gypsum, the less than pretty version of selenite that's in the drywall or plasterboard. We've got petroleum products that make up our carpets, and we've got copper minerals that are smelted to make the wire. We've got feldspars and other silicates melted down to make glass. Nothing around me is too far removed from the mineral kingdom. And then, you know, if we just go a few feet below me, there's rock. Maybe there's sand, but beneath that, there's rock. So we really can't be far from the influence of the mineral kingdom. Mother Earth's electromagnetic field is in part generated by her crystalline core, that beautiful iron that's there in the center, and then, you know, the interaction of all of the many layers of the core, the mantle, the crust. They generate this huge and powerful field of energy. So none of us are separate from that. We all walk within it. We're all influenced by it. And it reminds us also, you know, as above, so below. We've got the microcosm and the macrocosm. Just as the Earth generates this electromagnetic field and is made of all these crystalline things, so are we. We generate this massive electromagnetic field, and we are made of all these little crystalline bits and semicrystals and liquid crystals, from head to toe. There's no part of us that isn't at least somewhat crystalline.
I know, and just to see it and hear you speaking, it's like a poetry, it's like a beauty, because it places us right there within that framework. And I suppose it's that framework that hopefully we'll get the chance to explore a little bit further today. Starting, I suppose, with the first chapters of the book, really, which take us into an appreciation of the decoding potential that's available in the crystals. And I was so struck by the way you put this together. And for me, it felt like you were opening up the earth as an apothecary cabinet. And the many layers involved in that. So could you maybe explain to us a little bit about the decoding of the crystals, and if you can, how you came to that more whole system awareness, really?
Yeah. So let's start with how I kind of came to it. When I talk about decoding crystals in the book, I'm talking about looking at the sort of language of the mineral kingdom in terms of formation process, crystal structure, chemical composition, and then all the other kind of chemical, physical, optical characteristics like color and specific gravity and cleavage and hardness. But it started because when I went to college, I actually went to school on a music scholarship. My first declared major, at least, was as a music education, and I was minoring in Spanish. So I'd always loved rocks. I've been collecting minerals for a very long time. Had read every book I could get my hands on when it came to this sort of spirituality of crystals, but I had a really deep appreciation for mineral science. And it just so happens, because we believe in coincidences, right?
Right,
That I was randomly assigned to work at an earth science museum on campus. And I had no idea that we had one. When I saw that I was working at this place called the Gillespie Museum, I figured it was something related to the visual arts. I was in the auditory arts, so I figured since I registered late, I was moved, to the building next door. So I finally realized that if I show up for work, they will pay me. So that's a great thing. I do have 4 planets in Capricorn. It's a wonderful motivation for me. So I asked an upperclassman, where is this Gillespie Museum? And he gives me the strangest look. He's absolutely puzzled. Like, why on earth would I want to know where the Gillespie is? He's like, the Gillespie? What do you want to go to the Rocky Museum for? And I'm just like, we have a what? So as soon as I can, I start work. And I'm in love with the fact that here is this tiny little hidden treasure on campus. I went to a fairly small private university that was well known for its music school, among other things. And I had no idea we had this little treasure trove locked away. And within a couple of weeks, they gave me almost unrestricted access to the collection. And so while I'd always kind of appreciated mineral science, this was my chance to like dive in deep and really get hands-on with what minerals are, how rocks form, all sorts of stuff that I'd only kind of gotten a peripheral knowledge of, because your average book on crystal healing, even if it gets it right, it doesn't go very deep. So around this same time, I started trying to get as many older books on crystal healing as I could, books that weren't necessarily published in English originally. So I was looking at translations of things, and I started to notice trends. As I learned about the composition and structure and formation of rocks and minerals, I started to notice that different people in different time frames who lived in different countries had these intuitive experiences of crystals. And I noticed that many people describe iron-rich stones as being grounding, strengthening, stabilizing, energizing. And these are people who, because of the context of their writing, didn't have any access to one another's work. So then I started looking at older and older sources, and I realized that these were patterns that were there. So my first kind of instinctive realization was that the composition of a rock or a mineral has to have an influence on its energy. So I started looking at, easy things like the planetary metals. Copper bearing minerals were one of the first things I fell in love with working in the science field. And people who didn't realize what the composition of different stones were would describe them in very different or very similar terms if they had similar compositions. So, you read about things like shadokite and dioptase and cornatite, unusual things that aren't in your average crystal book. And you go, wow, these are very heart-centered stones. These are very visionary stones. These are stones that are associated with beauty as well. Well, those are all Venus-related things, and they all contain copper. Copper is the planetary metal of Venus. There's got to be some link here. So I started to kind of peel the layers back and look at crystal systems. I mean, all sorts of different classification groups that we use in mineralogy and geology that are maybe less overt in the book. Things like anionic bases and all sorts of different grouping systems we use for categorizing minerals. But it boiled down to having the direct personal experience as well as surveying the literature, there are three factors that influence a stone's overall energy above and beyond anything else. And it's the formation process, the crystal structure, and the chemical composition. So it's the ingredients, the way those ingredients are arranged, and the process that brought them together. And those three things are more important than any other factor. It's more important than color. It's more important than, we'll say, sort of overall appearance. If we can look at those things, we can look at what the mechanisms are underneath the therapeutic effects of the stone. So much of the literature that we look at is looking at the effect. It's like the tip of the iceberg. And that's why we can pick up, a book by one author and a book by another author and read a description of, let's say, rose quartz. And there'll definitely be common themes, but we often see some very different experiences described. And the reason for this is because most of the literature is focused on end results rather than the process that created them. So if we start to look at the underlying framework, the underlying process, we can predict what the end result is going to be, because the same mechanism applied to two different lives, two different sets of baggage, obviously gives us two different superficial results, even if the process that creates those results is the same. So that's where I've spent a lot of my time with thinking, contemplating, experiencing the mineral kingdom.
And that approach in and of itself is truly remarkable, because it's, as I said before, it's coming at it from a whole systems approach that actually considers the formative ongoing process within it all, referenced again all the examples of human cultures and societies that have interfaced in this way. So you've just brought it together beautifully. And I know we're looking at the crystal basics, which probably in the sunlight doesn't even, oh yes, there we go, it does come out back to front. And this is covered in this, but I also thank you so much for your generosity, was gifted with the stones of the goddess.
Yeah.
And of course you go into the significance in the process of this that you're just describing, the igneous metamorphic, sedimentary metamorphic, in relation to the goddess also. So your capacity to see it's almost on a quantum level, to see all the different connections and be able to bring them together. It's truly remarkable, Nicholas.
Thank you. That whole thing within the context of the Stones of the Goddess started as like a footnote I had falling asleep one night. I had to like climb out of bed and get over to my phone and type a little note to myself. And the project I thought I was going to use that for never happened. And then I took a step back when I was working on Stones of the Goddess in its real early stages. And I thought, what was that idea I had about the formation processes? And I was kind of looking at the relationship between the conscious, the subconscious, and the superconscious mind. And when we talk in terms of symbol, things have to be relative. We live in a relative universe. There is an absolute out there, but if we're lucky, we touch it by tiny little glimpses. So the way I was trying to format that process to the mind was still too tenuous. But then I just, the light bulb went off and I was like, oh, the three phases of rock formation totally align with the aspects of the triple goddess that are used in the sort of modern goddess movement. Why don't I explore this a little bit? And it was just like the goddess of stone herself. It came up and patted me on the shoulder and said, let's go this way. And I had that sort of divine guidance there.
To step alongside and journey with that. And
Sure.
I know when you do speak about the formation process, that does provide what I experienced as a kind of apothecary base level from which to then understand all the potentials and the unique characteristics of each of the crystals. So rather than it being a separate crystal for this or separate, rather than it being orientated by separation. I found your work orientated by a unification that I feel is very timely for what we sit inside of now and the potential of now. So thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You also you go through the formation process, but you also take us into what we open the conversation with, which is the mineral compositions and how that in turn may be of influence to our existence. You go into the details much more of the different minerals contained within the stones. Can you speak to that a little bit in terms of how that has enhanced your work, your trainings, your understandings, really?
For sure. Like I mentioned earlier, this was the first kind of correlation I saw between the science of crystals and the spiritual effects that we gleaned from them. So part of this in the early days that my firsthand experience was definitely informed by the books I was reading. I mean, we're talking, the sort of earlier generation of crystal books like Katrina Raphael and Jane Ann Dow. And when I could get my hands on some more unusual ones, I would. And these were people who were doing more than just working with quartz, because there was definitely a big trend to write entire books about the benefits of quartz. And I love quartz. It is all around me. But I'm a mineral guy. I love learning about rocks that are out there that are maybe less common. So I started to see those correlations, and then I started to think for myself, okay, well, if so-and-so writes about this iron oxide this way, and someone else says this about an iron sulfide, the difference here is the base the iron is connected to. So what makes the sulfur different from the oxygen? And then I would kind of like pull that apart and obviously meditate with the stone, sit down and have my own personal experience and kind of do a meta-analysis of the literature and filter it through my own personal hands-on approach. So that was kind of the early phase. And then I was lucky enough to stumble across people who'd already done this. Michael Ginger was a geologist before he was a crystal healer. Samaya K. Astor, formerly known as Naisha Azian, she teaches a lot about the correlation between the mineral side of it and the mystical side of it. There are some other great pieces of literature out there too, and I've had some wonderful teachers. But really, for me, it was trying to unite the sort of different streams of we've got sort of a more alchemical, mystical approach, which gave birth to the modern study of chemistry. So the mystic and the mundane are very interrelated there, and then just pouring those two kind of parallel streams into the metaphysical. So the human body contains more or less the entire periodic table, at least all the stable bits of the periodic table, and certain parts of us have, we'll say, a higher concentration of different chemical elements. And it stands to reason that if the chemistry of something affects its electromagnetic field, and electromagnetic fields can influence one another, then if I bring something iron rich into my energy field, then the iron rich parts of myself are going to respond to that through that kind of process of sympathetic resonance. So if we look at the things of us that are iron rich, the first thing that comes to mind is blood. So, the circulatory system is heavily influenced by iron. If we look at something like copper, copper is a really particular resonance with the reproductive system. Zinc has a strong influence on metabolism. So sometimes we can see the literal chemical links, the way these places are affected by their composition, and sometimes it's a little bit more symbolic. Silica is a strong component of hair and nails, but silica also provides a sense of metaphorical structure, not just the physical structure of those things. So we start to see the influence of that in parts of our lives, not just our body, but the area where we need greater clarity and greater structure. So not just quartz, but anything with a good, strong silica base is going to begin to bring that. So that part of decoding crystals for me is like trying to work out a puzzle in reverse. And I like doing those kinds of of projects. It's always been a really fun experience for me working with the mineral kingdom and trying to see how the pieces fit together. And that was actually what the process was for my first book, The Seven Archetypal Stones, which is kind of a weird book, but I'm kind of a weird guy, so that works. And it was like trying to get to that big meta level through all the little parts and pieces of archaeological history and mineral science and the sort of modern spiritual movement. How do they all fit together? I didn't know what the big picture was going to look like. I just knew that somehow the pieces fit together. And that's always been what I've enjoyed most about the mineral kingdom.
Wow, it's like the anthropology of the anthropologists. And you've been able to be dedicated and continue and go along that way. And what's another aspect of what I've loved about becoming familiar with your work, Nicholas, is that you shift the emphasis. The way that you present your material is so accessible, and you shift the emphasis quite clearly to the permission for each of us that live on the planet to in turn become our own healer, co-creator. You have hope in the human race that is a possibility. That's the natural, organic means by which we thrive. Was that intentional as part of your approach?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My secret mission all along from book one has been trying to teach people how to think for themselves, to think about rocks, to think about what the process looks like. Going back to that example I described earlier of, if we look at, the properties of rose quartz in the book, no two books are 100% in agreement, because we're mostly looking at surface level, what happened in this one person's life. Even if that person is a crystal healer, a therapist who's had hundreds, thousands of clients, they're still looking at end results. What is the process underneath it? So if you get to know a stone on that personal level, and you see what the process is underneath the effects, when you bring it into your life, you're going to be able to anticipate the effects a little bit better. You won't be disappointed when they don't match the book, because you'll be thinking for yourself. If rose quartz's job isn't to make my life more loving, but instead to help stagnant emotions come to life and move, and it stirs things that have been kind of locked in place. The end result is we express our emotions. Maybe we can do some forgiveness work. We can allow things to be in that beautiful ecstatic dance, be in motion again. And that makes space for love to come into your life. But rose quartz's job isn't to pour love into your life, but to give you emotional freedom, in a sense, to give you that ability to express and stir old patterns. And then love can flow back in. Love's already there. We just sometimes don't have room for it in our emotional body, because it's so, jammed up with other things. So if we start to think about rose quartz in that kind of language, what is the therapeutic mechanism? Then we can anticipate the effect, and the effect will be different for each of us. So we have to start thinking for ourselves. I do a lot of work with the public these days. I manage a spiritual shop here in Central Florida. And in these really unusual days, more and more people are coming to the spiritual to find answers, to have a sense of agency in life. Crystals are more popular than they've ever been. And so many people come in after seeing a meme on Instagram, a little diagram of crystals for their astrological sign, or for, this chakra, that chakra. And, they come in with a list, but they don't know why they're coming for this list, except that they read it. So, the first question is always, well, what are you working on? What is it you want to see happen? What is the obstacle you're trying to surmount? And if we can start to ask those questions, then we can partner the right stone for that. Everybody's throat chakra does not require aquamarine. Everybody's heart chakra does not require emerald. I mean, those are great stones. I think we all benefit from them. But the particular situation in your life, if you can start to think independently, to really allow yourself the space for self-awareness, one, you're in a better space to have a more intuitive relationship to the stones. If you're keyed into the situation, then even if you don't know your rock super well, if you're aware of the situation, you're more receptive to the stone that might come forward to help it. Then if you do know your rocks, then you can go, oh, obviously this issue I have with expression isn't about my throat chakra at all. It's a confidence thing. So I got to start working on stones for confidence, not for speaking.
Yeah, love it. I mean, you're calling to mind, I know my earlier training, just studying in the diploma for crystals. We had a part where you had to have a test where you had to identify the key crystals and what the properties were. It was quite mechanical in that way. And I remember realizing this is a really interesting process that's going on here, because I hold the crystal and the awareness seems to emerge. It was as if I didn't need to be rote to learning it, as in the traditional application of living with the crystals. And for me, that was a powerful awareness of the more expanded capabilities that we have innately within ourselves to develop. Everybody, it's just remarkable. Absolutely. And I suppose in terms of the process you're describing, it is so interactional between the minerals and the human being. And I suppose that interface does sit with our own, it sits with the consciousness both of ourselves and of the crystals likewise. Yes. I know in your book you go on to describe this phenomena in greater detail. Could you just share with us some reflections you have on that potential of conscious awareness as it's occurring? Could you share any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it is really interesting that where we sit right now, we are echoing maybe some of the earliest and most primitive, I don't really like to use that kind of language, but that's how we might describe it. Some of the most primitive ideas about stones, we're kind of coming back full circle. We went through the phase where stones were viewed very, we'll say, mechanically. This is an object, this is a tool, I am programming it, I'm installing some idea or energy or intention in here like a computer, and there's an end result of that partnership. And that's pretty much how a lot of crystal work has been. And now we're starting to come back to the idea that's been part of the earth all along, of viewing these as living beings. They might not breathe and grow in the same way that we do, but they have a very interesting formative principle that resembles that of organic life. And so there's a seed spark of consciousness in them too. And if we start to co-create with them rather than mandate what they ought to do and what we anticipate they will do for us, we get a totally different relationship. And it is that conscious and conscientious partnership that is going to drive the most successful crystal work. There is not a single successful crystal lover, whether that's purely therapeutic or otherwise, that I've met who hasn't at some point arrived at the conclusion that there is life within stones. And it's not just our beautiful gemstones and magnificent mineral specimens either. You go out into your yard and pick up rock, and if you can slow down just enough to quiet the mind and be present, you'll feel the sort of pulse of life that runs through it. It might not be a literal heartbeat. There's no organ inside that pulses, but there is a rhythm, a life force to it. And it's not all that far removed from us. In the grand scheme of things, organic life has only been on planet Earth for the tiniest bit. Even the most ancient of living things has not been here for as long as rock has been here. And the mineral kingdom is really the substrate from which all life emerged. There's this idea they call Luca the last universal common ancestor, the last thing that we're all descended from, that is, in the sort of evolutionary web that everything kind of comes from. Would have been something that emerged from clay minerals colliding, creating the first bases that would resemble RNA and DNA. We literally come from the earth. We literally come from clay. And this is something we see in so many different creation myths. Humankind being fashioned out of the earth, out of dust, out of clay, out of soil, out of stone, and life was breathed into it. Well, I think the life was already there, but another layer of life, another layer of consciousness was added. We literally come from stone. Crystals exist within every cell of the body. The water that is within us, I mean, we're like 75% water by weight, but by molecular count, we're more than 99.9% water molecules. Because they're so tiny, they weigh next to nothing. They don't amount to as much mass as other things. But for every water molecule in our body to have its optimum function, it has to exist in what's called a liquid crystal mesophase. It has to be in that sort of gray area between liquidity and crystallinity. It has to be structured water. So from head to toe, we are crystalline, or at least semi-crystalline, or in a liquid crystal state. We're not that far removed from the mineral kingdom. And when we start to view the relationship, the co-creatorship, the partnership with stones, we get so much more out of that. And it also speaks to the idea that there is more to what a crystal can offer than just its, we'll say, rote definitions. It's why you can have a stone that you really, really love that will bring you more than just what the textbook says it will, because we enter into that state of divine partnership.
We do. And that partnership is one that can accumulate and develop the more we spend time giving that attention, because I'm just thinking we are aware in the quantum fields that it's actually the observer, the observer's influence that in turn contributes to what's seen and the outcome. And I guess that's another route that your work includes, really. So it's
totally,
it's just so exciting, Nicholas, and your research is so exciting. It is phenomenal. There are in the Crystal Basics book terms that you mention that are of relevance, that are quite technical, and I don't know, I've got my notes here, but I can't quite remember. Can you help me out here? I know one of them was luminescence, another one was there was a series. Yes.
So even with the books that do go into the more sort of technical or mineralogical side of things, they pretty much stop after formation process, composition, structure. One or two will get into hardness, but as a whole, the crystal community likes the easy stuff like color, because it's such a pure psychological thing. We relate to it from the very beginning. And I have to admit something. I have a bias against color. I'm really profoundly colorblind. So it's like the last thing that I relate to in a stone, unless it's a really significant color for me. So I do all of my rock ID from those other things. So diaphaneity comes from a Greek word. Dia means through. The feign part comes from to shine. So it's light shining through, or not, as the case might be. So this is whether a stone is transparent, translucent, opaque, or somewhere in between those. The way light passes through a stone kind of represents the level of awareness that it influences. If something is opaque, a lot of opaque stones tend to work on our subconscious stuff, the unconscious mind. The translucent, sub-translucent ones kind of help begin to bridge the conscious through the subconscious. And think about our most luminous gemstones, the most brilliant transparent ones, quartz and gem quality selenite and things. They work on that super conscious level. So you kind of see a level of effect coming through that. It's not an absolute, but it's a trend. Pleochroism exists when you turn a mineral and view a crystal through a different axis, and the color appears to change. So a famous example of this would be tanzanite. If you look at tanzanite in polarized light, it goes from anywhere from like blue to violet to almost like a yellow gold color, sometimes pink. So the angle at which you view it causes light to pass through it and bend in a different way. So minerals that have any sort of color shift or pleochroism tend to work on more than one level at the same time. They tend to shift our awareness from one state of being into another. Iolite is another one that does this. We can look at other optical effects like birefringence or double refraction. Calcite's a great example. I'm sure lots of us have played with a piece of optical calcite and put it on top of a picture or a word and seen it split into two. So when we see that kind of thing, it's really doubling our perspective, letting us see things from more than one place. Cleavage. This is one that I saw real early on echoed in the sort of intuitive approaches to crystals. I remember almost universally when crystal healers, especially in the 80s and 90s, would talk about stones for cancer, of course, not as a substitute for medical attention, but as an adjunct. Fluorite is almost always a stone that's mentioned. And if you look at fluorite, it's got perfect cleavage in 3 directions. The way its molecules come together, they separate very easily along specific planes. And it always remembers its perfect form. If you drop it and it shatters, it forms a bunch of little cubes or octahedra, or a state in between called a cube octahedra. And if we think about what cancer is, it is forgetting the perfect template. It's forgetting the idealized form, the morphology that DNA should take, and the rate at which it should replicate itself. So, stones with perfect cleavage remind us of what that ideal template might be, not just for a situation like cancer, but for anything. It could be for the psychological state. We have, those patterns that exist in the psyche that want to replicate in ways that are not ideal. And then luminescence. So this is stuff like thermoluminescence, triboluminescence. So thermoluminescence, you apply heat and a stone will glow. Certain kinds of fluorite called chlorophyll are strongly thermoluminescent. There's a great mine in New Hampshire, Wise Mine, and it's this sort of minty green fluorite. If you put it in a hot pan in a dark room, it just glows brilliantly, like flashes of light. Triboluminescence is friction or rubbing that causes a stone to glow. And this is a really easy one we can all do. If you get 2 rough chunks of quartz, pick some that aren't pretty, and just go into a dark room, lock yourself in the closet and grind them together. They emit flashes of green light. If you've got an ultraviolet lamp, there's so many minerals that fluoresce under UV light. And then some of them phosphoresce also. You take the light away and they continue to glow. So, when we see the relationship between crystals that generate or translate or transmit light, obviously they're doing something with light on the spiritual level too. So I like to kind of assess all of these things when getting to know a rock. It's important to know the big stuff. Formation process is the level of action. Crystal system is almost like the direction of action, or the overall therapeutic mechanism. And then the chemical composition are going to be the individual therapeutic results, or the individual strains of consciousness coming together to paint that bigger picture. And then we can still get to know our minerals better by looking at hardness, diaphaneity, cleavage, and so on and so forth. And not every mineral exhibits all of these traits in the same way. You can get something that has great cleavage and something that has none whatsoever. You can get something that always fluoresces and some that only fluoresces under certain conditions or from specific places. And that's why we can pick up 2 pieces of fluorite that look superficially the same and feel very, very different.
Oh gosh, you just light it up. I mean, the breadth of wisdom and knowledge and research is just well, it's phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. And I'm just sitting here feeling the thrill of what you're speaking about. And I am aware of that our time together may be coming to a close. Before you go, because I could sit with this for a long time, but before you go, can I ask how viewers may be able to access you and further information about you and what you offer?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. So definitely visit your local bookstore. Find a little independent retailer if you can. They definitely appreciate the business. You can pick up a copy of any of my books. If they don't have it, I'm sure they're happy to order for you. The latest release is Crystal Basics, that came out just about a year ago. I have my own website, which is theluminouspearl.com. You can also find me on most social media as The Luminous Pearl. Speaking of stones that have interesting optical effects, that's one of my favorite kinds of myths, this idea of the stone that shone by night. That was really prominent in Chinese literature, but we find similar myths of glowing stones everywhere. So that's the reason behind the name everywhere. So you can find me on Facebook and Instagram and now TikTok as the Luminous Pearl, trying to embrace all the different avenues that I can reach my audience. On Facebook, I host a list of my upcoming events, and eventually the website will get updated too. It's been a little bit, but I do a monthly Reiki share that is free and open to the public. Donations from that feed various different charities that I have some connections to. I also have started this year a new online class series called the Monolith series, where I pick a single stone, one stone monolith, to focus on. So this month we'll be talking about garnet, but I've got a whole stream of ideas, and you can book those online. I send out replays if you can't be there live. And in the future, when the world is a little bit safer for travel, I look forward to being able to have a complete events list on Facebook and on my website for people to find. And hopefully I'll be returning to the UK and visiting other places. And it'll be great to connect with our listeners everywhere.
Oh, wow. 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 Yes, that would be an incredible opportunity, and so welcome. So welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, in the UK, this would be so well received, Nicholas. I just want to thank you so much for today and your time and the incredible awarenesses that you've opened the door to in your words and the way you put things across, that opens this possibility up for more to engage within. It is the times that we're living in. They are opening up to these awarenesses and possibilities. Do you think when we speak about the ascension process, the waking up process, do you see this being sat with, in part, the relationship with the crystal and minerals? Do you see that relationship being a significant part of how we can, work with the incoming energies?
Oh, totally. I'd say one of the first real kind of eye-opening experiences I had looking at the relationship between like the market of minerals and the sort of evolving consciousness of us and planet Earth was, I don't know, maybe 2006, 2000, somewhere around that time. The Nirvana quartz or the ice quartz, or it had a bunch of different names. Glacial etched quartz was coming out of Kulu Pass in northern India. And they discovered that quartz by the process of deglaciation. So in other words, glaciers are melting. That's not a great thing, but there was something underneath it. There was this profound tool, and anyone who's worked with this variety of quartz has felt how intense, how amazing, how timely it is. And that for me was a signal that, yeah, things are changing. And maybe not all of the things are for the good right here and right now, but there is support for us. There's a way through it to find these incredible consciousness adapting kinds of stones underneath something that we really shouldn't be losing. Was for me a glimmer of hope that even if we don't know how we're getting to the next step, we have support from the mineral kingdom. And year after year after year, I've seen new and unusual things hit the market. Things that usually hit the mineral collector side of things, the mineral science side first, and then kind of trickle down to the mystical and woo-woo side. And invariably, the new stuff that comes out is almost always in line with what our collective is experiencing. So, these are things that have been held in sacred trust within the earth, hidden by topsoil or rock or glacier or underwater in some cases, that are emerging when we're ready, when we need them, when the time is right. And it raises a lot of questions about conservation and ethical mining and all sorts of other things. I think we can do better in all of these places, but the tools are here. And so long as they're getting to market, I think if we're treating them respectfully and doing our best to source them as ethically as we can, we will always see these tools show up at the times we need them the most.
Just thank you. Thank you. Just such a huge, huge thank you for where you place us inside of in relation to the stones, what's happening now, and human conscious evolution, Gaia's evolution, and the possibilities before us. It's been amazing, Nicholas. You are amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The pleasure is all mine. It's been a privilege chatting with you. So thank you for having me.